Hey everyone, welcome to the Healthcare Provider Happy Hour. I'm your host, Jennifer George, and I'm joining you this evening with a special guest. Her name is Michelle Yan, and she's a mental health advocate for the LGBTQ community on raising awareness for mental health in the community as well as promoting wellness. She takes us down her vulnerable story of burnout, the impact of it, how it changed her life, and how she's on the road to healing, and also sharing her story to help others prevent burnout from happening to them in the third degree. You don't want to miss this episode. It's real, it's raw, and it's inspiring. Welcome to the Healthcare Provider Happy Hour. This is a safe space where we invite healthcare providers to unapologetically be themselves after the working day. My name is Jennifer George, and each week I will connect you with guests and stories that will help transform your stress to success and fulfillment. Are you with me? Grab your drink of choice and let's chat. Hey, Michelle.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Great. Thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Well, I couldn't resist, and we'll get into that in a minute. But tell me, what's your drink of choice today? I know
It is, yeah, I know that. It is actually Scotch.
it is Scotch.
It
Okay.
is Scotch, yes. I'm an avid drinker and I really enjoy it.
Good for you. And what kind of Scotch is it? Not that I know my Scotches, but some other
uh,
people.
Today I am drinking something called Aberfeldy 12 year. So it is a Scotch from Scotland, obviously, and it's from the Highland region of Scotland. So the Scotch itself is a little bit lighter, more lighter bodied. So yeah, it's a easy drinking Scotch, so it's quite nice.
Awesome. That sounds lovely, actually, just the way you described it and the name of it.
What about yourself? What are you drinking?
You know what? I'm drinking just a Diet Pepsi, and I don't drink too much. I'm usually like a water drinker, tea drinker on my podcast. But yeah, I couldn't resist a Diet Pepsi today. I was just craving something sweeter, but I hope the caffeine doesn't keep me up. So we'll see how it goes. So far, so good. So tell me more about yourself, Michelle. Like, without leading so much with what you do, like for work and stuff, but can you tell me more about yourself? How do you see yourself? How do others see you?
Yeah, that's a good question because when you say, without telling you about what I do, I find that like a lot of people, myself included, we identify ourselves so much with our job, right, or with our career. So I guess apart from that, what can I say? Well, first of all, I'm, in terms of, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a friend, I'm an auntie. In my culture, Chinese, I mean, I'm very close with my cousins. And so they're, sort of daughters and sons are my nieces and nephews. That's why I always refer them to. In terms of like how I am and my personality characteristic, I think that I'm passionate. Right? I'm very driven. I'm ambitious. I'm also like a little bit of like an extroverted introvert, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Tell me more about that. I think I can relate to that.
Yeah, so I think by nature, I'm an introvert, so I like my quiet times, I like reflection and so forth, but I can also, I derive my energy from people as well, right?
Okay.
So I get my energy from people, so I can be, out there meeting people when I want to, but at the same time, my comfort level is being, a little bit more reflective and introverted and just, a lot of times doing my own thing.
Nice.
I like to learn. I enjoy learning a lot, lifelong learner. So whether it be from an education standpoint, professional development standpoint, I just feel that, every day there's always an opportunity to learn from anybody I meet. So, I'm always have my ears open, my eyes open, just to see what I can absorb throughout the day. I'm also a mental health advocate, so I'm very strongly, focused on being a mental health advocacy. Recently, I've started to doing a lot of, meditation and, being spiritual. I'm an empath, I'm a giver. So yeah, so I think those are some of the, I would say, characteristics or qualities I feel that, that's a little bit about me.
That's amazing. I appreciate you so much for sharing all of that and for really giving attention to it. And it's interesting how you said that we are so attached to our careers as when somebody says like, who are you kind of thing, you immediately say, well, I define myself by like being a physiotherapist, right? I've always done that
Right.
in my life. Just in the last year or so, maybe have I thought of that differently? And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know about yourself, but yeah, like, I think going through your story, which we'll get to in a minute, it's probably reframed your thinking that way as well. But it's still stumping, right? Like when I still ask, it's still
Yeah.
and deeply reflect on it.
Absolutely, yeah. Like when you say, well, tell me about who you are, and instinctively, it's just like, well, I'm this. Like I'm this. I work for this company. This is my position, right? Because that's kind of how, in the world, that's what people ask you. What do you do,
Right.
right? They never really ask, so who are you, right? So,
Yeah. And I recently, last year, I did a talk at a high school. It was like an
mhm.
academic ceremony, and that was a part of my speech, was not to think so much about what you're going to do in life, but rather about who you'll become. And
Yeah,
to reframe that, because I do think by leading with who you are, it kind of can guide with what you end up doing. Whereas I think growing up, it's been backwards. It's been like, what do you do before who you are, right? Like what you do.
absolutely.
And so thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate you noticing that and taking the time to share more about yourself. Um, so
Welcome.
yeah, so tell me more about like your mental health advocacy. Kind of what inspired your passion to serve as one, and when did that start?
Uh, Good question. So I've always, I have suffered from clinical depression and generalized anxiety disorder on several occasions in my life. And it was something for a long time that I kind of didn't want people to know about. And in 2016, I was taking sort of a slew of different, personal development courses and so forth. And in one of my courses, in a self-expression leadership course, I remember one of my coaches saying to me, she said, Michelle, you are a huge impact to people, right? And you are a huge impact to community, right?
Yeah.
And at that point, I said, well, you know what? Talking about mental health and what I want, what I've been through, what I'm going through, I saw something bigger than myself. And so I decided to do something about it. And since, it was something that's affecting me, and I know that if I spoke about it, it would help a lot of people, I decided to start my project, and it's called This Is Who I Am Project. And it's focused on essentially mental health in the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you actually diagnosed with depression and general anxiety disorder at that, like when you were aware that you had it, you had already been diagnosed with it?
Good question. So back then in 2016, I wasn't diagnosed with it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I just was, had all the symptoms, and I read about it. I had all the, the feelings of sadness and just feeling really low, feeling really, a lot of negative thoughts. Um, and, it was always something that, I thought that, what's wrong with me, right? Why can't I, why am I so emotional? Why am I always thinking, all these negative thoughts? But it's up until my most recent um, burnout, which we will, get into the story,
Yeah.
is when I went to see, a psychologist and my doctor, and that's when I was officially diagnosed with clinical depression and generalized anxiety disorder.
And what feeling did that bring you? Did it bring you relief, or did it bring you more stress or worry
Um,
at the time?
I think during the whole time, during the time, like, this was, back in 19, like I said, in terms of the whole burnout that happened,
Mm,
I was already in a state where my mental health was deteriorating.
right.
So, going to the doctor, going to the psychologist to get that confirmation
Mhm.
was just something that, oh, it was actually this serious.
Okay. So it confirmed the seriousness of it. Yeah.
Correct.
Interesting. And maybe perhaps that you just couldn't do it alone. Is that safe to say, or overcome it alone?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was a really difficult time in
Yeah.
my life.
Yeah.
And I definitely, yeah, wouldn't have been able to do it alone. You know, I had a whole sort of support system.
Yeah.
My doctors, my psychologists, my friends, my family, and they're the ones who really helped, sort of pull me through that time.
So your mental health advocacy for the LGBTQ community specifically, did that like just stem from your own self-interest? Did you see there was a gap there? Did you see some inequalities there that you were hoping maybe your advocacy would help to fill or lead change in, and also inspire people to share their stories?
Absolutely, because apart from, you know, um, being in the closet,
Mhm.
and coming out to my parents probably when I was 21, being in terms of my sexual orientation,
Yeah.
my mental health was basically the second thing that I kept hidden, right? And, within the LGBT community, there's a lot of statistics that we have higher rates of depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive and phobic disorders, suicide, self-harm, right? And in an Ontario-based study, LGBTQ plus youth and trans people face increased risk, up to even 14 times the risk of suicide and substance abuse. And one of the statistics says that 77% of trans respondents to this particular survey in Ontario had seriously considered suicide, and 45% of them had attempted suicide. So just based on
Oh,
the rates, right, that LGBTQ plus youth, and people in this community have such a high percentage of individuals who deal with serious mental health issues, is such a concern, right? Because, they, you know, being sort of within this particular orientation, or, whether it be gender
mhm.
identity,
Yeah.
sexual orientation, or even, there's so many, um, I would say, issues that LGBTQ plus people deal with, their family not accepting them, religion, society, how society sees them. And I think, personally, I believe that all LGBTQ plus people go through this sort of internalized sort of, homophobia themselves, right? Because I certainly did, right? Um, you know, being in a traditional Chinese family, growing up in the culture, this was not spoken about,
Yeah.
right? So we talked about, what's, being, you know, straight,
Yeah.
religious, my mom's a Christian. So all these factors played into me thinking about, well, having these particular thoughts about women, or having these feelings about women, is that wrong, right? So for many years I struggled a lot with that, and I thought it was something wrong with me. And so even something like that, really affects, and people, fortunately, my family, regardless of my sexual orientation, they still love me. They're still supportive of me. My friends, my cousins who I'm very close with, all of them have been, super supportive. And when I spoke to them about my mental health as well, they were, they understood what was going on. And, some of them, understood what I was going through. So that, in a sense helped a lot in terms of people sort of validating, what I was feeling.
Right. And it was like the more you were able to be more of yourself, it's almost like that's where the healing was starting in a way.
Yes.
And I know it's been a journey, right? And it's opened you up to now supporting others who once were where you were, right? Or who are where you were. And I think that's remarkable. And I think when we talk about like health and wellness, for communities like the LGBTQ community, let's say, where the statistics are alarming,
Mm-hmm.
with respect to mental health, like I think sometimes we think of it as a systems problem alone, but it really starts too in the home, right, on a personal level. And if all of those aspects can come together and be accepting and welcoming and supportive, and also just overall equal, right? I just
Mm-hmm.
think that it would be better overall for their overall health, wellness, and support. Like just, not just equality alone, but all of it. Just them as
Yeah.
just as individuals, our own health, right?
Absolutely. I think a lot of it does start, within your immediate family, right?
Yeah.
And how supportive they are. Um, you know, when it comes to, LGBTQ people, youth,
Mhm.
it definitely starts in the family in terms of, where you're growing up, how supportive your family, your parents are, because I know many individuals that have struggled.
Yeah.
Some people have, some families aren't supportive, right? And it's so sad, right? It's so sad that families aren't supportive of who you really are, and they don't get it, they don't understand it, they think it's, you know, um, against nature, against, I've had
Yeah.
plenty of things that were said, about what it could be, but it's sad, and it really, when it comes to mental health, it's so hard on the individual.
Yeah.
When you start doubting yourself in terms of who you are, and going back to the question, not talking about what you do, but who you are. But if you can't even be, if you can't even, I want to say, be real about who you are, like how can you be real about anything else?
Exactly. Exactly. And then it's like you start to define yourself probably in a different way according to what others see you as, right? Or what you've um, had to tie yourself to others' opinions of you or whatnot, right? And then you lose your sense of self. I
Hmm.
really do think that by whether it's putting religion over your loved one or whatever it might be, that you are essentially denying somebody's health and well-being through unacceptance and whatnot. And, because I just can't see how it can be any other way, like leading down that path of feeling unwell and being unhealthy as a result of being unaccepted or feeling unaccepted or um, feeling like you can't be free to be who you are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and the sense of like rejection,
Mm,
um, that you get from other people, and the rejection of yourself because you think you are wrong, you're doing there's something wrong with you,
totally.
right? And that really affects mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, internalizing everything, right? It's like it's your fault or whatnot as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Tell me, like Michelle, you recently shared, like reason why I actually like wanted to bring you on as well, was because of your personal story with burnout. This is a lot of work that I'm trying to do in the healthcare community to support providers. And burnout, I know nobody's immune to it, regardless of whether or not you're in healthcare. But you had openly shared your story of burnout in one of my posts, and I was really moved by it. And I was just hoping if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so this happened in essentially last year in 2019, end of 2018, I would say. And I think it was just like a combination of workplace stress.
Mhm.
I felt that there was, quite a bit of a toxic work environment I was in, personal relationship woes, and just feeling unfulfillment. And so the combination of that is what, led to, essentially a panic attack at work. And then ever since then, everything started, sort of falling. So this led to increased anxiety. This led to depression, and it was really, really bad. It was really terrible. Um, I remembering, when I had that panic attack, I was sent home, and literally for the next 2 weeks out of that, every morning I would wake up with a panic attack.
Can you
And
describe, Michelle, what your feelings of a panic attack were, like what that experience was for you?
yeah, so I just remember waking up in the morning and feeling like I had no control,
Okay.
right? No control of anything. I felt that, you know, and for me, like I'm a type A personality type.
Yeah, I remember you
So
saying that. Yeah.
so I'm very type A, which means, I enjoy control. I want control. I'm organized, and having that feeling where I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
I feel like people are mad at me. I feel like, should I be going to work right now? Should I not be going to work right now? I feel like I'm letting people down. I feel like I'm letting myself down. I feel like, why am I, how did I allow myself to be in this situation? That was the biggest one, right? And so all of those thoughts in my head just got me spinning, and, my heart was racing. I couldn't breathe. So those were some of the symptoms that,
So you
why.
also had those, you also had those physiological symptoms too.
Yes,
Heart rate, breathing.
absolutely.
Okay. Wow. And that you were having those almost every day after that?
Yeah, at least for the first 2 weeks, essentially every single morning, I woke up with a panic attack.
Wow. And then would it just pass after a while, or did you?
Yeah, it did pass after a while. I just had to, try to sit up. I had to breathe, just, try to take deep breaths, maybe try to focus on something in my room and try to think about, describing that. So those are some of the, I guess, I don't want to say remedies, but those are some of the ways where I say, okay, you know what, I need to calm down right now, because not breathing, not being able to breathe is making me even more anxious.
Yeah, absolutely it would. And it would provoke panic, just that inability to feel like you have control over your breathing at
Right.
that time, right? So this went on for how long? It happened.
Um, the burnout, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the burnout itself, wow, it took 10 months to actually get back to normal.
And you said at some point too, like you found you had to learn to like read, right? Like, you had, I don't know if it was whether it was, you could tell me if it was your attention to do those things that was limited, or if it was like you like, did you literally have to relearn how to read?
Yeah, so what happened was, like, there were certain instances through my entire, so, obviously after that happened, I took a leave of absence from work,
Right.
but during the 10 months, like, there were different triggers throughout those months that made my illness worse. Okay, so when it got worse, basically it got to a point where it took me out. And when I say it took me out, I meant, I would only be sleeping all day. Like, I would read a page of paper, and I couldn't comprehend. Like, I see the words, I
Yes.
see the sentences, but I actually could not comprehend what the words were saying on that page.
Wow. So your nervous
Um,
system was like depleted.
completely depleted, completely shot. I would sit up and try to watch TV, and
Hmm.
within 15 minutes, like, just watching, um, the nature channel, or
Yeah.
something simple and won't require a lot of sort of brain power to understand. Just watching birds, watching whales, I would be so exhausted after 15 minutes because my body couldn't take it.
Wow. And so how did you end up overcoming it? What were like your supports and what were your strategies?
um so fortunately, I have such an amazing group of friends.
Mhm.
um and my friend Charles, essentially, when something like this happened, he actually rounded up my entire family. I was in my condo, unable to move, in bed. He came over and he basically called my mom, he called my dad, he called my brother, and he's basically saying, like, you guys need to be here right now because
Wow.
this is what's happening, right? And within like an hour, my entire immediate family came to my condo, and he was there, basically explaining what was happening. And yeah, it was through, like, my friends. I went to see a psychologist, I went to see a doctor, he gave me medication, and slowly by slow, one day at a time, um, I had to, sort of how to learn how to use my energy properly, right? So if 15 minutes of TV was too much,
Mhm.
that's okay, go to bed, right? And then next day, let's try, see if we can go for 20 minutes. Or, even going up to take a shower was, way too difficult because it took too much energy. And after that shower, I was so exhausted, I had to nap,
Wow.
right? So, yeah, so it's through basically a team of amazing people, friends, family, my doctor, my psychologist, that slowly, sort of put a plan in place for me.
Nice.
Um, it went to an certain extent where, we even said, okay, pre-plan what you're actually going to do for the day, right? And literally, these are some of the activities. I'm going to meet with friends for half an hour for a coffee. I know this is going to be too much. I need to even rate it, like, out of, one being, low energy or don't require energy, 10 being the most energy I will need to put into it. I need to rate in terms of which activity. So it was up to that degree where I had to sort of manage my own, with help with my psychologist and my friends, to determine how much energy I should be expending that particular day.
Wow. And that's quite like it's crazy because you are a type A personality person, probably used to doing so many tasks and things
Yeah,
one day and working nonstop and and then you have to humble yourself too in a way now to appreciate the very small but meaningful things like seeing your friends for a few minutes, just having downtime to read or watch TV. Like it's just, that blows my mind that you experienced it to that degree.
yeah. For
Wow.
me, it was just like so difficult,
Yeah.
right? Because in the back of my mind, I kept saying, how did I allow myself? How did I allow myself to get into this particular situation, right? I've been a mental health advocate. I have my project since 2016. It's 2019 right now.
Right.
How did I let this happen,
And
right?
so that's
And
what I want to ask you. Like, have you ever gotten an answer to that? Like, I know what you said might have been the triggers, but people fluff this stuff off though, Michelle, right? Like people fluff off workplace toxic relationships. You know what I mean? It was just a part of their life, but they don't realize the, the compounding factors of these stressors over time.
absolutely, yeah. And what I did was I ignored those warning signs, right? When my body was tired, when my body was overwhelmed, I said, you know what, Michelle, stick with it, right? You're gonna get through this. No big deal. You've done this before. And I just kept ignoring those warning signs, right? When I would feel, emotionally exhausted, physically exhausted, mentally exhausted, I would say, you know what, tomorrow's a new day. You can do it again, right? So, and I think that was the issue. It's because when I started having those negative thoughts about myself, when I started having, feeling bad or feeling guilty or not being able to make certain decisions, I say, oh, tomorrow's going to be better. today's just, a crappy day. It's not even realizing how it would affect me, not even realizing how it would affect me, mentally as well as physically. I had never expected that being, mentally unhealthy would affect me physically. And so it's ignoring those warning signs that, that have come across my mind so many times, and say, I'm going to push through it. I'm going to push through it. I'm going to push through it. And that's what led to, complete panic attack, complete burnout.
Eventually your body and you just couldn't take anymore. Neither could
Mm-hmm.
the mind too. Um, yeah, I find like that, you gave me goosebumps when you just said all that, because I mean, I think I can relate to that in ways, and I think stressors in my life come and go, and it's very easy for me as well to just suppress them and just, in that, there's a famous quote around that, like tomorrow's a new day, right? And it's supposed to be
Yeah.
optimism and joy, but I think without acknowledging the day, the moment you're in, or the day you just had, I think that can be a little bit dangerous too, because like we said, it just adds up over time, and you're really just shutting that out rather than expressing it in some way and addressing it. And I find that burnout results a lot from suppressing over time and
Yes.
not dealing with things as they come. But everything is so much clearer in hindsight, eh? Like you
Absolutely.
sure there was nothing
Yeah.
you really could have changed about that. It was like a journey you were supposed to go through, and probably help people now moving forward by sharing your experiences, which I know I greatly appreciate.
Yeah. They're like, I think back to myself, like, was there anything I could have changed? Right? Was there anything that I could have done? Um, you know, if not ignoring those warning signs, would I have done, I would have probably done the same thing. Right? It's because it's just my personality.
Nature, yeah, yeah. And now different, right? Like you've seen the consequences of it. And I think now, would you say, what do you do now to kind of prioritize preventing burnout from creeping back into your life again?
Yeah, yeah, because that was phew, such a, I would even say, it was such a devastating experience for me, right? Because I'm a person that is, like I said, in has so much control of myself, and I feel that I'm, a driven, motivated person. Um, and going through that experience was, and I keep going back, like, how did this happen, right? And I can even imagine, especially, with yourself and healthcare workers, it's, you know, your duty and what you do is to serve your
Yeah,
patients, right? And, you're the one who's supposed to be strong. You're the one who's supposed to be taking care of people. And when something like this happens, it's just like, what is going on right now?
exactly. And that's our duty no matter what. And and then it's like, at what cost, right? And that's kind of where this podcast comes in, like at what cost, and at what point do we say, okay, now I have to like put myself first. I remember
Yeah.
not long ago I was sitting in a lunchroom with a coworker, and they had a doctor's appointment, and something was off. I think it was their blood pressure or something, they were telling me. And the doctor had asked them, like, well, do you drink water? Right. And the nurse
Mhm.
who works at the hospital with me, and she was like sarcastically to the doctor, like, what do you mean? Like, how am I going to like drink water or make sure I get enough water in? Like, I'm a nurse for a living. Like, there's no time for that, right? And it's the reality. It's the reality of what we do. Like, it's nonstop, especially in hospital. For me, I can say the same because that's where I'm at now. And it's
Yeah.
nonstop, that it's so easy to forget about yourself, or not even to forget about yourself too, Michelle. It's like, it's just not to prioritize yourself, right? It's like, you should be, but it's not a priority, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's where it becomes a bit touchy. So like, what kind of self-care now do you do to like kind of try to prevent this from happening again to you, or some degree of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've established a morning routine.
Okay.
I've established a morning routine where, I tell myself that these are the things I need to do in order to, get through my day. So things like having a routine of like exercising, right? I'm doing meditation. I am more aware of what my body is telling me, right? So not just mentally, but physically, right? Is my body feeling tired? Can I concentrate in terms of what I'm doing, what I'm reading? Am I pushing too hard? So all these sort of cues, I constantly need to remind myself and need to think about where is my body at. And of course, from a mental standpoint, I also ask myself, how does this make me feel right now? Right? Do I feel mentally exhausted? Do I want to continue this conversation with this person? Do I want to work on this particular project right now? Right? So I'm a lot more in tune with, what my body's telling me, and having, a routine where, I am more balanced in terms of taking care of my body. I watch what I eat in terms of what I'm consuming, what I'm putting into my body. Even though I said I was an avid drinker, not really an avid drinker, but more of an avid Scotch drinker when I do drink. I actually don't drink very much. It's only once in a while if my drink of choice would be Scotch. But I do, I am very careful in terms of what I'm putting in my body. I've recently, realized that, I'm really enjoying quinoa and chickpeas, and, my lunch, it's, I'm mainly vegetarian. So it's a combination of a lot of different things that I've actually changed for what I feel would be good for my body and my mental health.
And I love the way you put that because it's a process too, right? Getting to know you, becoming more self-aware physically and mentally. And it's kind of like having a conversation with yourself, right?
Yeah,
It's like, how am I feeling? How do I feel right now? And I love that thought of or that practice, I should say, of checking in with yourself. Like, how do I, because we're constantly putting out, right? Constantly
mm,
injecting, putting out, and we don't check in with our own energy and our
yeah,
own being. And I think it's important for, like, for what you just said too, to identify that it does take time to figure out what works for you,
it
and
does.
not to give up on that, right? Just to keep figuring out what helps you and what helps you thrive, gives you the most energy, and kind of keeps you safe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it took me 8 years to get into meditation.
Wow.
I wasn't able to get into it because previously there was so much stuff going on in my mind. It was running at like 100, 50 kilometers an hour. I couldn't focus. I couldn't quiet down. Let's put it that way. I couldn't quiet down. So it was so difficult for me to get into meditation. But after all this happened, right, I tried it recently in the last couple months and I'm loving it, right? It's an opportunity for me to actually think about and reflect and quiet my mind down and really ask myself, what am I putting in my body? Whether it be, the food I'm consuming, even the news that I'm watching, right? Or the people I decide to, continue interacting with. Are these good for me? Right? These are things that I keep checking in with myself, to see if, how my body and my mind is reacting.
So do you do this completely in silence, Michelle, or do you have a guided meditation going on in the background?
Yeah, so right now I am using a guided meditation. My friend a little while ago introduced me to Deepak Chopra. So right now I'm actually listening to his guided meditation, and it's daily. So it's very short, 15, 20 minutes. Since then, I've enjoyed sort of researching different individuals who do guided meditation. I find that helps because it helps me focus just on, they say, focus on your breathing. Let's take 10 deep breaths. So for me, that helps because just getting into meditation, um, for I don't know what to expect. So having those guided meditations do help me sort of focus on certain things they ask me to.
Yeah, I do the same. I tend to prefer guided, but I can't
Mm-hmm.
do it very long. Like, for you to do 15-20 minutes to me is like remarkable. That's like definitely a goal. I can maybe do like 3 to 5, like, and I do have a loud mind too, and so I work on it though. Like that's the thing. I don't give up on it because I know that
Yeah.
I feel better after doing it. And sometimes it's just that anticipation beforehand for me that already kind of messes me up, right? Or so I just got to get through that part and get right to it. And sometimes I find I get into it a little bit easier than I expected.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
all about practice as well.
exactly. And I do it like once a day, like first thing in the morning for me. But I probably should be doing it more frequently. I try to center myself. Like I'll take deep breaths throughout the day. I'm saying gratitudes throughout my day, like just in my mind as I'm walking up and down the halls of the hospital type thing. So I'm try to keep myself very mindful throughout my day. But actual sitting and stillness for me is a challenge still.
Yeah, and I imagine it was a challenge for me too, like very, very challenging because, like you said, there's so much going on in the mind
Yeah,
nonstop. There's so much things you need to do. There's so many things you should do, and it's hard to quiet down. And yeah, like I said, for me, it took a long time to be able to be where I am. But I think it's because of when I went through like the whole burnout that you know I need to take this seriously, right?
absolutely.
And, you know, for me, I wish that no one would ever go through this. But, there are people who are pushing and struggling and just, especially healthcare workers in terms of your field. Like there's so many people who are pushing. I have friends who are nurses that are pushing so hard, right? And I said that, don't you think about yourself? Like you need to take a break. You
Yeah,
need to slow down. And they're just like, it's just what I need to do. It's just what we have, right? So I really, I really do think that people need to stop and really, think about what they're putting their body through.
right. So would that be your piece of advice to those who might be struggling, even with honestly, even the common layperson who's going through the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Lack of connection, things like that, as well as, the rise of like social protests and revolutions that are happening. There's just so much heaviness in the world right now. Like, what is your advice then for people who know that burnout, like healthcare workers, is just right around the corner? Is your advice to just stop and check in?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah, because with COVID, I mean, there's so much uncertainty right now and it's so scary. I've spoken to people where their nervous systems and anxiety levels are so high and it's up and down, and people or families who've been actually had people who've been affected by COVID,
mhm,
whether they've been really sick or they've, unfortunately passed due to COVID. It's scary, right? And my recommendation to people is really just, you know, recognize how you're feeling, be more in tune to your feelings, right? When you feel that you're starting to have issues making a decision about something, right? You're fluctuating between, should I do this? Should I not do this? Right? Or what I find most helpful is when you start feeling guilty about something. That's the biggest trigger for me.
yeah,
Like, why am I feeling guilty about this? Because when you start feeling guilty, or when you start feeling guilty about every decision that you make, that's when you need to recognize that, okay, you know what, something is going on with my mental health, something is not quite right, right? I need to step back, I need to slow down. What am I not doing? What I should be doing right now? So I think it's really just, being more aware of what you're thinking, because a lot of it is your mental, what you're thinking, your mental health go like tells you first before your physical health deteriorates. So
right.
it's just really understanding, um, you know address those negative thoughts. Where are they coming from? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you feeling exhausted? Are you exhausted every single day of the week? And even the weekends, if you sleep 10, 12, 14 hours, you're still exhausted. That tells you something.
Yeah, definitely. And they say there are like various degrees of burnout, and it sounds like yours was the third degree. And but they do say like the first degree, second degree, I think, like first degree is very mild, where maybe you do take a day or two off type thing, and then you're like the weekend off, and then you're ready to go back, pretty much unaffected in a way. Um,
Yep.
but, and if that's not enough, then it could be second degree. And if that's not enough, then you might be in the third degree. So I do think there's, like you said, there's warning signs along the way, right? Like indecisiveness, that's such a good point, is probably a really big one too, especially for people who are typically type A, who are used to being in control, used to making decisions for themselves and for others, even if they had to. And all of a sudden are now second guessing themselves and unable to just have the energy to do that anymore.
Absolutely. Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
and,
absolutely.
and just asking yourself like why that is, or being aware of it, is so powerful to getting help, or to hopefully preventing it from getting worse. Uh,
Yeah, and I would say don't push it off,
yeah,
right? Don't forget about it. Don't, say I'll be better tomorrow,
yeah,
right? It's because people who ignore these warning signs is when it starts building.
yeah. And then it just hits, and then it
Yep,
like it
out
like
of nowhere.
knocks
You're
you.
like, what happened?
Yeah, yeah. And Michelle, so what, like right now, so after your journey through burnout, is this part of your mental health advocacy too? Like, are you talking about burnout in the communities and stuff, or is this just something you're starting to share perhaps?
It is, yeah, it is something that I'm starting to share because, it just happened so recently, and for the longest time, I was struggling. I haven't been very active with my account for a little bit, and it's because of those negative thoughts saying, well, if you're a mental health advocate, how did you allow yourself to be in this situation? Right? So there was a lot of shame,
Yeah,
embarrassment, there's a lot of guilt, right? But like I said, despite that, your post on your IG about burnout, that, when I saw that post, I was like, hey, you know what? This is such an important topic that affects so many people, but we're not talking about it. And, for myself, who've actually firsthand experienced it, regardless whatever profession, and in healthcare professionals, I know you guys deal with so much
mhm.
that I can't even, comprehend, but you guys deal with so much things that this needs to be talked about, because so many healthcare professionals are burning out and they don't even know what hit them. And that's why it's so important to talk about. And, now in my feeds and on my IG, that's something that I definitely want to start addressing.
Well, thank you so much for sharing it with your community and networks too. I really appreciate it, because I think what you said there was really powerful, and it's something that I've shared as well, is that the shame and the guilt, and you almost feel like you're supposed to fix yourself, right? You know what it is. You know that you're not well. Why can't I help myself, right? And I think that's a lot of self pressure to put on somebody. And we know that as healthcare providers, we wouldn't expect somebody else to just fix themselves, right? So it's having that self compassion too, that I think sometimes we forget about, rather than just only compassion for others. Um, and yeah, I think, like, I know personally too that some people have told me, and this is not like I post things, right, but not many people will comment because it's a touchy subject, but I'll get messages about it, about their stories. And it's like that fear of being unfit to practice or take care of somebody else, because you might be going through something right now, right, where you might need some help. And yeah, it's definitely a bit of a stigma that way, that we in a way put on ourselves, I think, to some effect.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. Especially, if you are at your work in a position of power, or you are a manager, or, any type of where you have a team, right? If they knew, this is the person thinking, if they knew that I was dealing with something like this, that I couldn't handle myself, I couldn't take care of myself, what would they think of me, right? So that there is a lot of shame, associated with individuals who experience this, and that's one of the reasons why they don't want to talk about it.
yeah,
But for me, I went through that exact same thing. Right? I went through that exact same thing. But what I believe now is that it's important to talk about it,
Yeah.
right? Because I find that we are a lot more alike than we know, and
Mm-hmm.
people experience a lot more things, that are similar than we know. And I think by sharing this, what we went through, how we overcome certain things can help people, sort of hopefully, be in a position of, hopefully I can be in a position to help them not get to that point.
Yes, exactly. And that I share that exact sentiment, is that that's my purpose for doing this as well, and for bringing light to this, is to prevent them from getting to the point where it does become a medical emergency, where your life is literally on the line. And
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. And I think connection and sharing that, and I know it takes vulnerability, but I do believe that that's healing for people too, like you said, because we are more alike, and to not feel so alone.
Hmm.
Mine in healthcare and in a lot of leadership type positions too, perhaps there's a bit of loneliness there, because you don't really share your true self sometimes, because you feel it might take away from the purpose of what you're doing for your work, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's like you're expected to be this, professional. You're expected to be in this sort of superior role, and you're supposed to be all in, high and mighty, and you should be knowing everything. So being that vulnerable to share a story about something that you went through that was possibly like stigmatized is very difficult for people.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Michelle, I would love to keep talking about this, but I think we're going to be cut off.
No problem.
Honestly, we are going to reconnect over this again soon for sure, because I really appreciated having you here. I appreciate your vulnerability,
Welcome.
yeah, and your willingness to share, and hopefully support and inspire others to do the same. And like you said, you wouldn't wish what you went through upon anybody. And so by sharing it, I think, one person will hear it and deeply connect, and hopefully stop it before it gets to the point of complete burnout. So thank
Absolutely.
you again.
You're
You're all.
welcome. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
If you guys want to follow Michelle's project, This Is Who I Am, a project for the LGBTQ community on raising mental health awareness and promoting wellness, please check her out on Instagram at Let's End the Silence. Let's end the silence, guys, by sharing each other's stories, by making this a safe space to talk about burnout, to talk about stress and prevention, and to inspire others on their journey wherever they may be. Until next time, stay happy. So if you guys like this podcast, please subscribe and leave an honest review. Your feedback means everything to me. Your reviews are what moves this podcast forward, and I always appreciate receiving them. If you want to get a hold of me directly, reach out to me on social media. My handles are in the show notes, and you can always subscribe to my weekly newsletters at jennifergeorge.co so that we can stay connected. So until next time, thank you guys so much again for your ongoing support.